Have you ever loved someone who couldn't meet you where your heart was waiting? Maybe you gave pieces of yourself in hopes he would see. Maybe you waited in silences, in long nights, in unanswered messages, for a sign, any sign, that he felt the same. And when he smiled, when he stayed for a little longer, when he said something tender, you believed. You believed it meant more than it did. You believed presence meant permanence. But it didn't. And when he left, or stayed halfway, it felt like it was you who wasn't enough. But what if I told you? Men fall in love differently. Not less. Not shallowly. Just differently. For many women, love is a river. It flows, nurtures, expands. For men, sometimes it's more like a cave. A place they enter slowly, hesitantly, only when they feel completely safe. And often that safety isn't something you can build for them. It's something they must find within themselves. Louise Hay said, "The point of power is always in the present moment. And that moment, that sacred now, is where love actually happens. Not in the stories we create, not in the what-ifs or the one-days, but here, now, with what's real. And what's real is this. A man only truly begins to love when he feels safe enough to be fully himself. When his defenses melt, not because you fought to get in, but because he chose to open." But this raises another question. Are you feeling safe to be loved without chasing, without proving, without shrinking? Because sometimes, the ache we feel is not just about how they love, but about how we forget ourselves trying to be loved by them. We've been taught to interpret every gesture as a promise, every good morning text as a sign, every glance as a destiny. But gestures are not commitments. Impulses are not intentions. And many women carry the heartbreak of believing too early, of investing too deeply in someone who was only ever passing through. And what hurts even more is that most men weren't taught how to stay, not emotionally, not vulnerably. They were taught to protect, perform, pursue, but not to feel. And so, they fall in love not through poetic words, but through space, through respect, through admiration that grows in silence, not pressure. Brené Brown reminds us, vulnerability is the birthplace of connection. But most men were told vulnerability is weakness. So when they feel something deep, they often run. Not because you're too much, but because they've never been allowed to be soft. So ask yourself gently, are you trying to be loved by a man who hasn't yet learned to love even himself? This isn't a judgment. This is a sacred pause, a breath, a whisper that says, you deserve to be chosen consciously. And maybe that choosing begins within. There's a kind of ache that comes from always being the one who tries, the one who texts first, the one who stays awake, waiting for the smallest sign that she matters. It's a quiet ache, the kind that doesn't scream, but lingers, the kind that whispers, maybe if I love a little more, he'll stay. But love, real, grounded, masculine love, doesn't grow through insistence. It grows through space, through stillness, through the invisible energy of respect that isn't asked for, but silently recognized. A man doesn't fall in love with words. He may enjoy your beauty, your laughter, your presence, but what bonds him is the way he feels when he's with you, the way his nervous system calms down, the way your energy says, I see you, but I don't need to possess you. Women, in their tenderness, often confuse availability with intimacy, but a man doesn't fall in love because you're always there. He falls in love when he feels free to be himself in your presence, when there's no demand, no pressure, no need for performance. That's where trust is born, in the silence between two people who don't need to fill the space with explanations, in the absence of control, in the choice, not obligation, to come closer. And here's the quiet truth many women have never been told. Your power is not in giving more, it's in allowing space to be sacred. Somewhere along the way, we were made to believe that love meant proving ourselves, being agreeable, making ourselves small to be wanted. But true love doesn't rise from sacrifice. It rises from sovereignty. A man respects what he senses he cannot dominate. He draws near to what feels complete, not perfect, complete. And when you begin to treat your presence as something valuable, he begins to feel it too. So if he feels distant, if he doesn't move toward you, ask yourself, have you been filling all the space he needed to come closer on his own? Because love doesn't grow in noise. It grows in the quiet courage of letting him feel your absence and still choose your presence. There's a certain kind of woman who gives beautifully. She gives her time, her attention, her softness. She gives because it's her nature to care deeply and to hope that her love will be enough to awaken his. But sometimes behind that generosity, there's a silent prayer, a longing that whispers, If I give everything, maybe he'll finally see me, maybe he'll choose me, maybe he'll stay. And that's where the wound begins, because giving too soon, too much, too often, especially when it isn't reciprocated, doesn't make him love you more. It makes him feel less responsible, less present, less committed. The paradox is cruel. The more you try to win his heart through giving, the more he senses that you don't believe yours is enough. Louise Hay once said, "I no longer need to prove myself to anyone." And there's a kind of liberation in that, the kind that allows you to pause before overextending, to ask, why am I offering more than I'm receiving? Overgiving can feel noble. It can feel spiritual. But often it's just fear in disguise. Fear of being left. Fear of being unchosen. Fear that, without doing more, you won't be seen. But what if the love you seek isn't something to earn? What if it's something that should meet you where you are? Not because you worked for it, but because you are already whole. When a woman stops overgiving, something shifts. She stops performing. She stops rescuing. She stops handing over her power in tiny, invisible ways. And instead, she returns to herself, to her center, to her worth. It's not about becoming cold. It's about becoming conscious. Giving from overflow, not emptiness. Because when you pour too much into someone who isn't emotionally ready, you don't nourish him. You drown your own light. And love born from depletion will never lead to fulfillment. So maybe the real question isn't whether he'll love you back. Maybe the question is, do you love yourself enough to stop convincing someone to choose you? There's a quiet line between connection and control, and most of us cross it not out of malice, but out of longing. We want to be close. We want to be chosen. And in that craving, we start doing just a little more, just a little sooner, hoping he'll feel something deeper. But men don't fall in love through pressure. They fall through presence, through resonance, through the subtle safety of emotional space. Attraction, real attraction, is born when a man feels free to want you, not obligated to please you. And yet so often, a woman begins to ask, why hasn't he responded? Or, why doesn't he show me more? And the fear creeps in, the fear that if she doesn't do something, she'll lose him. So she sends one more message. She tries a little harder. She leans in before he's ready to meet her. And in doing so, the energy changes. What once was an invitation becomes a demand. What once felt magnetic begins to feel heavy, not because she's too much, but because the timing isn't mutual. There's a rhythm to emotional bonding that can't be rushed. It's like music. If one person plays faster than the other, the harmony breaks. A man connects emotionally when he feels seen, without being smothered. When he feels admired, not chased. When your desire doesn't make him responsible for your joy. The pressure doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it's in the silence that expects too much. Sometimes it's in the tone that asks for more than he's ready to give. And sometimes it's in the eyes that look at him not with love, but with need. But when a woman steps back into her own energy, when she remembers that her worth isn't measured by his response, everything softens. The dynamic shifts. The space breathes again. Because emotional attraction can't be forced. It emerges when two souls recognize each other in peace, not urgency. So maybe, instead of asking why he isn't feeling enough, ask yourself where you began to confuse pressure with presence. There's a wound that forms quietly. It doesn't begin with betrayal or harsh words. It begins with absence, with inconsistency, with the feeling of being emotionally alone while standing next to someone. And when he pulls away, when he closes his heart, when he shuts down instead of leaning in, you wonder what you did wrong. You wonder if you were too emotional, too intense, too much. But maybe he just never learned how to love. Not because he's incapable, but because he's afraid. Because no one taught him that real intimacy isn't dangerous. That being close doesn't mean losing himself. That opening up won't make him weak. And yet, you carry the weight. You analyze every silence. You replay every moment. You take his coldness and turn it into self-blame. But here's the truth. Few people say out loud, his inability to love you properly has nothing to do with your worth. Some men are emotionally shut down, not because you didn't give enough, but because they've never felt safe enough to face themselves. And instead of healing, they distract. They run. They detach. And the woman who only wanted to love deeply, is left wondering if she asked for too much. But what if loving someone who doesn't know how to love isn't noble? It's painful. What if holding space for someone who refuses to grow isn't strength? It's self-abandonment. You are not responsible for awakening what he refuses to touch. You are not here to prove that love can heal him. That's not your burden. That's not your path. Because the moment you start confusing his emotional avoidance with your unworthiness is the moment you begin to disappear from yourself. And the woman who disappears from herself will always feel invisible to others. So maybe the question isn't whether he can love. Maybe it's whether you're willing to stop shrinking just to be chosen by someone who doesn't even see your fullness. Love doesn't always arrive as quickly as we hope. Sometimes it arrives in pieces, in pauses, in steps so small they almost feel like silence. A man's heart, unlike the immediacy of a woman's emotional openness, often unfolds in stages. He doesn't bond through intensity. He bonds through time, through inner recognition, through the slow awakening that tells him, "This is safe. I can stay." And that's where many women begin to suffer, not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't show it in the rhythm she understands. While her love may bloom early, his may take longer to grow roots. While she envisions a future, he's still trying to make peace with the past. While she's ready to dive deep, he might still be learning to swim through his own fears. This doesn't mean he's incapable of love, but it does mean that love, for him, often comes from admiration, not urgency. He moves from desire to comfort, to consistency, and only after that, to true emotional bonding. And that journey can't be rushed by affection. It can't be forced by presence. It deepens through dignity, through the quiet power of a woman who stands tall in her own worth. Because when you stop trying to make him feel something, he has space to realize what he feels on his own. And when that realization is born from his freedom, not your effort, it lasts longer, it roots deeper. But if you try to accelerate his heart through fear, if you overgive, overexplain, overstay, he may retreat, not because he wants to leave, but because he never had the chance to arrive on his own. So the power lies not in the chase, but in the calm. Not in the waiting, but in the choosing. The choosing to remain connected to yourself even when his process is slow. Because the woman who respects her own pace becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, a man sees not just her. He sees the kind of man he needs to become to stand beside her. And if he's ready, he will rise to meet her. Not because she asked, but because he finally wants to. There's a moment, often quiet and unnoticed, when a woman realizes she's been waiting. Not just for a message, not just for attention, but for permission. Permission to believe she is enough, simply as she is. And in that waiting, something sacred is lost. Louise Hay's words echo like truth through silence. You're not here to be chosen. You're here to choose yourself first. And when you do, everything changes. Because when you stop performing for love, when you stop bending to be seen, when you stop holding your breath hoping someone finally values your soul, your energy shifts. You return to yourself. And in that return, a quiet dignity rises. A vibration that says, I am not here to be rescued. I am not here to be approved. I am here to be whole, with or without applause. Men feel that shift, not just in your words, but in your presence. When you are no longer seeking validation outside, your inner power becomes unmistakable. Some will step away, not because you did anything wrong, but because they can no longer feed on the old version of you, the version that waited, that worried, that needed to be picked. But others, the ones aligned with truth, will feel something deeper. A pull not of possession, but of reverence. Because a woman who chooses herself first isn't hard to love. She's just impossible to manipulate. And in that self-choosing, something miraculous happens. You stop begging for love and start attracting respect. You stop chasing potential and start aligning with reality. Your aura speaks before you do. Your boundaries form a soft edge around your heart, and your silence becomes more powerful than any attempt to convince. So maybe the question isn't whether he'll choose you. Maybe the real question is, are you willing to be so faithful to your own light that only those who come in truth can find you? There's something almost invisible that builds true connection, and it's not how much you give, how much you care, or how often you're there. It's how free you are while doing it, because a man can only bond when he feels safe. And paradoxically, he only feels safe when you are not depending on him to make you feel whole. Emotional safety is not created through control. It's created through space, through the unspoken message. You don't have to complete me to be close to me. And that's where true intimacy begins. Not when two people lean into each other out of fear, but when both feel strong enough to stay connected without losing themselves. A woman who is emotionally free radiates something rare. She listens without needing to be right. She gives without resentment. She loves without asking for rescue. And in that freedom, he feels something unfamiliar, but deeply healing. He senses that being loved by her is not a trap. It's not a burden. It's a reflection of what's possible when two people show up whole. But when you give your heart with invisible strings attached, when your love is loaded with expectation, urgency, or unspoken demands, the energy shifts. He no longer feels safe. He feels responsible. And responsibility kills romance when it's not chosen. So ask yourself gently, have you been loving from freedom or from fear? Because a woman who loves from freedom doesn't need to convince. Her presence says enough. Her peace speaks volumes. Her energy invites him to rise. Not because she needs him to, but because she doesn't. And that's what makes her unforgettable. Sometimes the deepest lessons aren't taught through words. They're felt. They're sensed. They're absorbed in the quiet moments when no one is explaining anything, but everything is being revealed. A woman doesn't teach a man how to love by telling him what to do. She teaches by being, by embodying the energy of love that is both soft and sovereign, open, but not exposed, giving, but not depleting, present, but not performative. When she moves from her center, from a place of emotional alignment, her energy becomes a living example of what love can be, a mirror he didn't know he needed. He sees how she says no without guilt, how she honors her time, how she speaks the truth without violence, and receives without attachment. She becomes a living invitation, not to win her, not to possess her, but to match her. And in that silent exchange, something profound happens. He begins to realize what love actually feels like. Not chaos, not performance, not conquest, but consistency, kindness, clarity. Most men were not taught this. They were taught that love is a transaction, that it's proven through grand gestures or silent endurance. But your energy, when it's grounded, clear, and true, becomes a correction to that narrative. Not through lectures, not through tests, through presence. And the man who is emotionally available, even if still learning, will feel the difference. He may not articulate it, but he will recognize that something about you feels like peace. Not excitement, not drama, peace. And peace is what the right man bonds to, not because it thrills him, but because it heals him. So never underestimate the power of your own emotional vibration, because more than anything you say, it's who you are, when you're not explaining, that teaches him what real love is. There's a quiet desperation that sometimes hides behind devotion, a hope so deep, it starts to bend your dignity, not because you lack strength, but because you've been taught to earn what should be freely given. So you try to show him your worth. You try to prove you're the one. You explain your heart, defend your love, offer second chances, and soften every boundary, all in hopes that he'll finally understand what he has. But here's the unspoken truth. The moment you start trying to convince him to love you is the moment he stops needing to. Because what we chase, we place above us. And what we over-explain, we make smaller. And no woman should have to plead for the very thing she was born worthy of. Real love doesn't come through persuasion. It comes through recognition, through mutual resonance, through two souls meeting at eye level, not one kneeling for crumbs. When you try to convince him, you teach him that you'll settle, that your heart is negotiable, that your presence is available even in the absence of reciprocity. And that is the deepest emotional turnoff. Not because you're unworthy, but because you've abandoned your own emotional standard in the name of potential. But what if you stopped performing? What if you stopped waiting for him to change and started listening to what his inaction already says? Because a man who truly sees you, who values your essence, doesn't need convincing. He doesn't need pressure. He chooses, clearly, freely, completely. And until that kind of man appears, the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to be chosen by someone who only sees fragments of you. Your love is not a campaign. Your soul is not a sales pitch. And your worth is not up for debate. Not everything needs to be said to be felt. Not every part of you needs to be explained to be known. There is a sacred power in the woman who doesn't rush to define herself, who allows her essence to be discovered slowly, layer by layer, breath by breath. That's not manipulation. That's mystery. And mystery, when rooted in truth, is magnetic. It's not about withholding. It's about honoring the parts of you that aren't for immediate consumption, the dreams that take time to be shared, the softness that waits to feel safe, the boundaries that don't need justification. Because a woman in her emotional mystery isn't hiding. She's protecting the sacred. Louise Hay said, "I am in the process of becoming the best version of myself." And that process, that becoming, is not for everyone to rush or witness. It is hers, and hers alone. When you live from that place, your energy shifts. You stop oversharing to feel close. You stop exposing wounds to feel seen. You stop rushing intimacy out of fear that he'll lose interest. Because you know, the right man will stay curious. He will move slowly. He will meet you in the spaces you've kept quiet, not to take, but to honor. Mystery is not the absence of truth. It's the presence of depth. And in a world that moves too fast, where everything is revealed too soon, the woman who is emotionally whole enough to keep something for herself becomes unforgettable. She is not loud, but she is powerful. Not because she hides who she is, but because she knows her energy is not something to be accessed without reverence. So if you've ever felt that being mysterious made you less lovable, know this: the right man will not fear your depth. He will feel invited into it, not to conquer it, but to cherish it. Sometimes the most painful part of love isn't the silence. It's not the distance. It's not even the ending. It's the moment you realize how far you drifted from yourself trying to be enough for someone else. You stopped laughing the way you used to. You questioned your intuition. You hesitated to speak your needs, not because you changed, but because you were slowly disappearing in the hope that he would stay. But the truth is, you were never too much. You were just loving someone who didn't know how to receive what was sacred. Louise Hay once wrote, "I love and accept myself, and I am safe." That's not just a phrase. It's a return, a homecoming, a quiet reclaiming of the woman you forgot while you were waiting to be seen. Because you were never meant to beg for love. You were meant to embody it. And Brené Brown reminds us, men don't fall in love with the woman who abandons herself to be chosen. They fall in love with the woman who stands rooted, who stays whole, who doesn't need to be rescued, because she already rescued herself. Understanding how he loves won't save you. Trying to decode his silence, predict his timing, or earn his affection will only lead you further from your own center. The real transformation begins when you stop asking what you did wrong and start remembering who you were before you started shrinking. You don't need to be chosen by someone who doesn't know your value. You need to choose yourself so clearly that only those who truly see you dare to come close. Because the kind of love you're looking for, it doesn't come when you chase. It comes when you rise. And the man who is ready for that kind of love will not just admire your light. He'll protect it, honor it, and never ask you to dim it. So let this be your reminder. The most irresistible woman is not the one who's understood. She's the one who understands herself. And before you go, remember to subscribe if this message touched something sacred in you. Share it with someone who's also walking the path back to herself. And if you're ready to go deeper, click the video on your screen now. There's more waiting for you. There's always more when you're ready to return to your truth.